Hello, this is Donnie here with Standing Goats Rescue, and I wanted to tell you about one of the encounters I've had, the worst one that I had, which happened in Marianna, Florida. It's a little farming community, and the encounter was in 2011. I'm thinking it was around April or May that year. We had a large peanut farm, and our job was to take care of the wild hogs that were devastating the crops. And we had 6 of us, and we had a gun and light at night permit to go out there at nighttime and shoot the wild hogs. Well, I had traps set up. We had tree stands, climbing stands. We had a lot of gear set up there. And one evening, about 10 o'clock, I needed to go set the traps, and I waited all afternoon for one of the other guys. He was going to go out there with me when he got off work, and finally, about 9 o'clock, I called him to find out when he was getting off, and he had been off. Long story short, he was at home, was going to bed, and, well, the trap needed to be checked, and so I called a friend of mine and asked her if she would ride up there with me. And I had a Toyota Tercel, a little small car. And I had her drive. And I told her, when we get there, we'll pull across the first field, just a little small field, roughly 5 acres. And on the east side of it, it's real thick. The vegetation is just incredibly thick. And there's a little old trail that runs from that field to the main field, which was around 1,200 acres. And the road was just wide enough for the tractor to get from field to field. And so I had her park the car right on the beginning of that road. We couldn't go down it because the car would get stuck. It was rutted up pretty good from the tractor. Well, I got my rifle. Had it in my arms, had my headlamp on and a fanny pack with a snake bite kit, my gutting knife, and just necessities, things that I carried with me when I was out there. And I started walking down that trail, and I had my headlamp turned to the lowest setting. It had a low, medium, high, and then a red light, and then it would go off with each click of the button. It would go to the next mode. And so if you were in the low beam, you'd have to keep clicking it to go through the medium, high, and then the red, and then it would go off. And as I got almost to the other end of that little trail, there's a small creek, a little ditch about a foot wide that crosses that road. And when you get to it, most of the time you can just step over it.
Florida.
And as I was approaching it, I could hear what sounded like somebody off to my left side that was walking the same direction I was going, about 20 foot inside that thick brush, and so I couldn't see anything. It was really thick, and the headlight wouldn't penetrate it.
Just my opinion.
But when I got to that little ditch to cross it, right as I took my last step before I stepped over,
there's no trees down around here.
A really deep, bassy,
this is really high
noise,
area.
A sound. And I planted my
no
foot
trees
right
down
as I was hearing the sound, and
there's some limbs that
by
are
the
down.
time my foot quit crunching the maple leaves that I stepped on,
bent trees,
the sound had stopped. And I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a wild hog. There were so many of them out there. Well, I sat there for about 20 seconds, and there was no other sounds. It was quiet.
Got knocked over.
Well, I stepped over the ditch, and I crossed that field, and I made it to my trap, and the trap was empty. The feed was gone, the water was gone out of it.
Healed up.
I didn't have any of that stuff with me, so I turned around and headed back across the field. And when I got back to that road,
Caveman that did that
little trail,
just from what I've learned,
as soon as I stepped in it, about 7 to 10 feet inside that
some
that
of the
trail
stuff
is
they
where that
show,
little ditch
it
is.
just
It
doesn't make any
crosses.
sense.
And I stepped over it, and as soon as I
no
got
trees
over
on
it, I heard that
We got a
same
good
sound
tree
again.
canopy
And that
up here.
time, I knew
It's
exactly
windy
what
now.
it was, and it was a
tropical
growl.
storm
And
west of us.
I can tell you all day
That's the reason you're hearing
that
all
it
the
was the
leaves.
deepest
But I
growl
just
I've
wanted
ever
to show that
heard.
tree. Look at that.
But it doesn't do justice for just
And there's pine
how
needles
deep it was.
still on it,
I've
so it
never
was
heard
definitely
anything
alive whenever it
that deep. I mean, it
got
came
knocked down
from the bottom of a
it
100-foot
fell.
well.
I don't know how it ended up on the ground, but
It was just, it
where it
was
lay.
frightening.
I just wanted to
And
share
as I
that.
got my other foot over the
3
ditch,
times now I've heard something.
an odor hit me. A
my
very
left
foul
back here.
odor. And it smelled like wet dog.
Got my wife and our daughter
Had a little bit of a urine smell to
ahead
it.
of me. I don't
It
know.
had a earth smell, like the little bucket of
scared.
worms you get when you go fishing, the live earthworms, that smell that soil has. It had that odor to it, and it had a faint skunk odor and almost a rotten smell, and stinky feet. It was so many different nasty odors combined into one. Well, automatically, as soon as I smelled it, I remembered my brother-in-law. He's a forester, and he's an avid hunter also, and he had told me about bears. And I've never seen a bear in the wild, but I'm scared of them. I don't want to see one. I don't hunt them. Florida, it's an act of Congress to get a tag to get a bear, and they're just not worth fooling with, in my opinion. But I was going off what my brother-in-law had told me, is that the bears stink. They had just an awful smell to them, and what I was smelling, I didn't recognize. I never smelled that before. It was so strong that it literally burned my nostrils. My eyes were watering. It was so awful. And so I opened my mouth, and I was breathing through my mouth because the burn was that strong. Excuse me. Well, I continued to walk, but I was taking baby steps. I headed back to the car and just literally heel-to-toe steps as slow as I could move, because I didn't want to draw attention to this bear. I didn't want him to know I was there. And I can hear the raspy breathing, like you hear somebody who smokes a lot, that gurgly sound. And as I was walking, this thing started walking also the same direction I was going. But he was angling toward me, toward that road I was on, that little dirt trail. Well, I continued walking, and the sound was definitely getting closer. He was approaching me. And I tried to speed up. I've had several spine injuries. I've broke my back 3 times, and I broke my neck in 2005. And I cannot run. I physically am unable to run. And there was no way I could have ran and got to the car. Well, this sound, as it's getting closer, my heart's starting to beat pretty heavy, and I've got it in my head that this bear, he sees me, he knows I'm there. Well, I continued heading toward the car, and this thing's getting closer, and he's growling. About every other step or so, he would growl, and the ground was almost shaking. It would thump with each step. Well, he stepped out right on the edge of that trail. The briars, the wild grapes, all the growth is just incredibly thick. And I heard it. When he stepped through that, he opened that up like a curtain and stepped through it. And I stopped dead in my tracks. He was right behind me. And I was staring ahead at the car, and I could see the moonlight shining off the chrome parts of my bumper and the little rings around the headlights. I could see the chrome reflecting the moonlight. And I estimated the car to be about 60 yards from me, and There was no way I could have covered that distance with this thing right behind me. Within there was a thumping and the ground was shaking. I could feel it through my feet. This thing's growling at me, and then he'd take a breath in, and the raspiness, that gurgly sound in his lungs, that congestion, it was so loud it sounded like a growl as he was inhaling. And I didn't know what to do. And then I stopped. I was standing still, and I could feel the ground shake each time I heard this thump. And I can't turn my head. In order to look to my hard left or right side, I have to twist at the waist because I lost a vertebrae in my neck and a couple of discs. And due to the hardware, I don't have that mobility. And so I twisted as hard as I could twist. And in the meantime, right before I turned, I took my gun off safety. I had a 7mm short Magnum, and I had it ready to fire. And I twisted as slow as I could to where I could see him. And I was expecting to see a bear, the head of a bear, waist to chest high off the ground right there behind me. And when I got twisted enough that I could see, the road was almost blacked out. And I had to look up. I could hear him growling and that raspiness. And when I looked up, his face, it was so much higher, so much taller than I was. And I was looking at the face of a man. His eyes were excessively large, way too large for his face. And the whites in his eye, it was just a small amount. It was almost all pupil and dark eyes. But he had his mouth half opened, and I seen his teeth, and they were square. They weren't pointed at all. They looked like our teeth, like humans' teeth. But he had his fist clenched up, and he had his arms, his elbows to his side. And he would raise his fist up, and then he would swing them toward the ground, and he'd stomp that foot, his left foot. And that's where the ground, it was shaking the ground. He was so heavy, or he was stomping so hard, but he'd sling them fists down, and he'd stomp that foot. And I was petrified. I was so scared. My heart was hurting every beat. It just hurt. It felt like I had a knife stabbing in me. And then I started hyperventilating. And he was just about the length of the rifle from me. About 5 foot from me. Tops. I could have reached out. If I would have leaned over, I could have touched him. And he was just growling and making a snarling sound like an angry dog. And throwing his fist down and stomping. And I've never been afraid like that. That was the worst fear I've ever known. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have an answer. And I looked back toward the car, and I knew I couldn't run that distance. That was around 60 yards, and there was no way I could have made it. If he would have reached out, he would have had me in his hand. And the only thing I knew to do was to reach up, and I got my headlamp, and I started cycling through the different modes as fast as I could push the button on it. And I was aiming it at the car. And my friend that was in the car, she evidently seen it, and she turned the headlights on, and then she turned the high beams on, and then she started blowing the horn and flipping the high and low beams. They were flipping fairly frantically, and the car was running with the windows up because it was hot and mosquitoes were bad, and she was sitting in the air conditioning. But I could hear her from 60 yards away with the windows up. I could hear her yelling inside the car, and she was using the F word, and she was saying F and run, really loud. And when she started blowing the horn, that's when this caveman thing, he took off. He came from my right side when he stepped out of the brush. And when he took off, he went to the left side. And it sounded like a runaway car had left the highway. He was just snapping huge limbs or trees. I don't know. I couldn't see him. I was headed to the car as fast as I could get there. Well, I got to the car and I opened the front door, and normally I'd put my rifle in the back seat and I'd take off my fanny pack. I'd put all my gear back there and take my boots off because of the mud. And I didn't. I piled in the front seat, loaded gun and everything. And I asked her if she seen that bear, because I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. And I think she was more upset than I was. And she said that wasn't no effing bear. And I asked her, I said, what do you mean it wasn't a bear? And I knew what I saw, but I didn't tell her that. And she said that was an effing man. That was the biggest man I've ever seen in my life. And what clarified it with me that I actually did see this is she said he had his fist clenched. And he would swing his fist down and he would stomp his foot at the same time. And then I knew, that I wasn't imagining. I didn't tell her, the thumping sound. I didn't tell her about the ground shaking. And we left. And we talked about it some. And the following day I called her to see if, just to get some more out of her, the details that I didn't see. And the only thing she told me, what really scared me, he was tall. He was really tall, very large, very wide, especially at the shoulders. And she said the top of my head was at the upper part of his stomach. She said I had a ball cap on, and she could see his entire chest over my head, and he was behind me about 5 feet. And she said that his shoulders were every bit as wide as that opening that where that road is cut through. It's open all the way up to the clouds. The farmer cut all the trees just to cut the road. And she said it was complete. There was no moonlight coming from behind him. She said it was blacked out. And I don't think he was that wide. That would have put him at 7 foot. But in reality, what I saw, he was probably 4.5 foot wide at the shoulders. But we haven't talked since. She got in a bunch of trouble and we parted ways. But we ended up, she had trouble as far as nightmares and having the night tremors, or I don't recall what it was she was diagnosed with. But I ended up dealing with the same thing, and even today it bothers me. And because of that event, I will not go in the woods when it's dark out, and I leave before it gets dark to prevent from running into one of these things again. And I've had several encounters since that time, since that encounter. None of them have been like that. None of them were that aggressive. And I've smelled the other odors in this area where I'm getting all the evidence at now. I've smelled different odors. They were nothing like the one in Marianna. And somebody had commented on one of the videos that I made where I'd mentioned I smelled it and I didn't know what it was. And they commented that I was goofing around because that I shouldn't have been that calm to know that one of them things was there, but I didn't know that they had different smells. This area I'm hunting at, there's never been anything like that up there. It just started a few years ago, and now I'm dealing with these things almost every time I go up there. I thought they would be more on the lines of a wild pig or a deer, all the animals that are out in the forest, they have an odor, they have a smell to them. And anybody who spends time out there with them, that hunts or hikes, or people that are just nature lovers, when you've been around the animals, you don't have to see the animal to know what's around you. A skunk smells like a skunk, a wild hog smells like a wild hog, and a buck smells like a buck. All the animals have their own unique smell. And evidently, these things, these caveman things, they don't. They have different odors, and I was unaware of that. I'm learning as I go, and I'm going to make another recording and to post. I want to post my other encounters on here. I'm doing this because it was suggested, because I want to get some answers. I still have nightmares. I still have trouble. I'm scared to be in the woods when the sun's down, and it all stems from that encounter that I had in Marianna. And I'm having a hard time with it. And I'm just looking to get answers. And it was recommended to post my encounter and then go back and read the comments. And I've learned so much from you guys. And I can't thank you enough. Everything that I've learned about these, other than the footprints and seeing them and hearing the whistling and all this other stuff they're doing, outside of the physical evidence, everything else I'm learning this from you guys. And I just wanted to thank you. I hope you enjoyed this encounter, and please, if you have any input, any advice for me, I'll gladly accept whatever you have. I'm grateful for anything you guys leave, any comment you leave. And if you have rude and abrasive things to say to me, just please leave that out, or at least leave the foul language out. Well, I do appreciate it, and I'll be working on the next video here within the next couple of days. I do not have internet. I do not have a computer. I'm having to do this all through my phone and my mobile data, but I'm learning. I'm getting there. Well, you guys, y'all have a wonderful day or a wonderful evening, and take care of yourself. And if you're out in the forest, just respect these things and give them a wide berth. If not, they'll take it on their own, I'm sure. Well, God bless each and every one of you. And again, thank you. Thank you all. All right, bye-bye.